What's up? We're live. I'm going to start with this Elizondo clip, and then we'll get right into it.
I talk about in my book that the external part of the craft may be ablative, sacrificial. That's why there's a lot of layers. Potentially what happens is that when it's juiced up, there is an interaction between the energy source and the outside of the craft, which is actually the engine. It's not actually an engine inside. Mm-hmm. And that is what creates that bubble. But every time you juice it up, you lose a layer.
I see. It's disposable.
Correct. I talk about in my book that the external...
So, Ashton Forbes in the house. Welcome, Ashton.
Awesome, Jeremy.
Awesome job on Candace Owens, by the way. I tuned in for that, and then you notice how right on cue they come out with some other distraction to pretend like all that physics that you just dropped on bombshells on that channel were basically nothing. But you were talking about some real physics, some real patents, and some real stuff. And I'm happy that you're joining us today to dive into this. I know that you've done some great deep dives into the science on your channel, and I've been fortunate enough to have participated in a few of those in the live chats, and been able to share my research and knowledge and expertise on these kinds of things as well. Often giving you some good links and stuff to look up, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, I think the Candace Owens interview, man, what a just mind-blowing thing to be able to do. Like I watched a lot of her stuff, and when she direct messaged me and asked me to go on the show, I was like, holy crap, like this is, for me, that was almost as big as Joe Rogan, probably, just especially because I talked to her, like we sat down and we spoke for like 30 minutes before we did the interview, and just to feel it out, stuff like that. She had never interviewed anybody that was like a physicist or an engineer or anybody that talked about like science like that. She never
science is way out her wheelhouse. Yeah, she's more like hardcore, like Christian conservative.
She's like totally open to the idea that like we're hiding this technology. She told me right away, because I wasn't sure. I just went on it like I didn't care if it was going to be adversarial or what the situation was going to be, but also to reach out on the religious aspect. I don't know what your religious affiliations or beliefs are, but one thing I've found throughout the last year is that they in the UFO community, they always try to say it's like, oh, it's the religious people that are holding back disclosure because they think it's alien or demons and stuff like that. But like I found that the religious people are much more open to this. I find it's the opposite. It's the people that are more stuck in the ways of like God isn't real and only stuff that's possible is what we already know. They're more
the atheist or skeptics community, because even Mark, who works with Falcon Space Labs, he's like Jewish. He's like was raised Jewish and went to like Hebrew school and all that, and he's convinced that the whole Torah and the whole Jewish Bible is based on alien worship. He thinks that like all the worship of the angels and the gods are actually aliens, and so there's a lot of mix in that whole the whole religion and science thing, and but my focus has been like the scientists and my dad's an engineer. He's worked on a lot of energy projects. He's been an oil refinery guy, worked in the oil industry for like 20 years on big time oil refineries and stuff, chemical engineering. So I was raised on science in my household. It was always a big part of it. And I didn't want to be a chemist or a chemical engineer like my dad. I wanted to do physics because it was different. And actually, Richard Feynman got me interested in studying physics in high school when I read his autobiography and learned about how he worked on all these classified programs for the Manhattan Project. And I just became super fascinated by all those classified programs and the history of all that. Do you know that there's quasi-governmental organizations which have higher security clearance than the president, yet have no official government FOIA oversight or any kind of accountability?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest things that people need to start understanding. It's not as simple as it's just the government. Like these people have no accountability. They're not beholden to the law whatsoever. They're just above the law. And they are even higher than the president with respect to this. To me, I think it seems like it goes back. You almost have to be a student of history to really understand the suppression of the technology, because A lot of people know the Invention Secrecy Act. That's gotten a lot of popularity last year in terms of how they've been able to suppress anything that's patented that they don't want out. But also the Atomic Secrecy Act around 1948 and 1954, when it, I think was it Eric Weinstein or somebody else was mentioning this. There's been clips out there that basically, like, if it's related to physics, related to nuclear energy, et cetera, or energy in general, like, it is born secret. They don't even have to classify it. So this is where I've always stated, I think the first time I heard the idea get thrown out there was with Tucker Carlson on Joe Rogan, where he mentions this idea of like UFOs being connected to the Manhattan Project. And I sat there and thought about it. I remember watching Oppenheimer and some of the other stuff and going through the history. I'm like, man, what if they just discovered that, like, we can actually just, E equals MC squared. That's huge. But what if we also discovered, like, we don't even need mass, that we can just pull the energy all around us, and now you have weapon of infinite destruction? Like, that makes sense why you would hide it if that was true.
Yeah, that's true. But then again, like, how do you hide something like that? Because if someone can figure it out one place, then they should be able to figure it out in other places, unless it's some kind of unobtainable, like element 115, where it's so super hard to get the stuff to actually do it, and you can control all of that, the supply of that material.
Well, I think the answer is mind control.
That's one thing Dave Rossi said, is like, if you order certain things online, certain materials, that they'll know, like, oh, hey, we know what you're building, and you'll get a knock on your door.
Oh, I think it's definitely true. I don't know how. I don't know about that exact scenario, but yeah, if you are pushing like the wrong buttons, they can tell if you're like over the target or not. And if they see you over the target, I'm sure they're listening to everything that you're doing and building. Like, for example, I think a good example is like you were watching the negative resistor stream we were doing the other night. Man, I guarantee you start building some of that, you might get a knock on the door. That's the kind of thing where, like, they're gonna be watching and they're gonna see, like, how far, are you doing it? Are you having success with that? Because that's the kind of thing that'll make people start thinking, like, is our conventional view of physics really correct?
Yeah, where's her name? I got her up here. Dr. Cheng.
Did you get in touch with her, by the way?
I emailed her. I reached out on LinkedIn and through email. So hopefully she gets back with us. I would love to talk to her more about that. She's out at the University of Buffalo, right out in New York State. So she's a 6-hour drive from us. I went to the Senate Intelligence Committee, the UAP hearing for the Senate. I was not able to get into the congressional hearing, but I went and spoke with Senator Gillbrand, and Kirkpatrick kind of walked out of there very fast. But as I was telling her about these legacy UFO programs that have existed since the Manhattan Project and have a higher clearance in the government, I was talking about Battelle Memorial Institute. She got very interested in that and said that she was like, oh, I wonder if they'll give me a tour. And this other gentleman interrupted her and wanted my information, and then he said he would give her a tour personally. This guy right here. This is a very interesting clip. I don't know if I want to play it right here, right now, because it's not directly related to the science, but I just definitely wanted to throw that in for people out there who aren't familiar with the work that I've tried to do on disclosure and bringing this out to the public. I really feel that if we had gotten this information in front of Congress and gotten some, whistleblowers to testify about these legacy UFO programs that really go back, because I really feel like they tried to whitewash and reinvent the wheel on the whole UFO file and really mislead the public through a lot of the media on what actually is going on with this. Because you're right, the technology has existed since the end of the Manhattan Project. It came out of these companies, which literally they run all of our national labs, right? Battelle Memorial Institute. You can look them up on here's just the Wikipedia article, but you go down here to all the contracts they have. They literally run Brookhaven, Idaho, Lawrence Livermore, Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Savannah River, Pacific Northwest. They're running they have management contracts for all of our national laboratories. And they have
these labs are no joke.
In control since the Manhattan Project.
Yeah, that was one thing. I posted a clip of this guy. I forget what his name was, but it was a TikTok clip. And whoever that guy was, he knew some stuff, because one of the things he mentions too is this idea that we figured something else out during the Manhattan Project, and we dropped the bomb, so it became impossible to hide the atomic bomb at that point. But that also there was a lot of stuff leaking out from that project, and so supposedly they learned how to compartmentalize it even better. And this kind of goes also to like how Pudov was saying to like Jesse Michaels and Eric was like, they figured out that you shield it in these third-party contractors, and now it's invisible from FOIA.
Yes, yes.
Right.
This is where the drain plug is on the swamp, ladies and gentlemen. It's all locked up in these stovepiped quasi-government. These people literally made the demon cores for the Manhattan Project. That's like they handled all the uranium end product for like the core of how that nuclear warhead works. They were in charge and responsible for that. The most classified part of the atomic bomb.
These people don't realize how dangerous these companies are as well. Like in terms of they use umbrella corporations, just like when you're like laundering money and stuff like that, to hide the paper trail so that the money goes from the Pentagon to these companies. They go through other shell companies. And then, so if you were to look at it on the books, it's just looking like it's going to these like subcontractors and stuff like that. They have their own militaries. Like they hire people right out of the military as like mercenaries. They have their own like security forces. They have their own hacking forces. And a lot of these special access programs, like what was this Constellation one you were just talking about? They like got, the name dropped or whatever right after my interview. Like in those cases too, they have counter intel people. Like I'm pretty sure Lou Elizondo is one of those people where it's like all they do, they're getting paid 6 figures just to sit around and monitor social media to see if like the information is leaking out from the special access programs, right?
And his big leak that I played at the beginning was that this is an ablative material and it's layered. And we're going to get into some real physics on this show that go way beyond anything that Lou has talked about. This is like, it's funny because they are the counterintelligence. I'm glad people are waking up and realizing it. Dark journalists and others have been saying this since the start of like when TTSA came out and how that all went down. That's a whole nother issue. It doesn't deal with the physics, but the physics is the most important part because they promised us a science foundation. They promised us to build us a craft, and I know a lot of people that invested in TTSA personally. I know a guy who they took for almost $1 million. He invested his entire life savings thinking that this was going to be it, and they've produced nothing. It's been like almost 7 years since then. So they've really taken control of the UFO narrative in the mainstream. And then when someone like you gets out on a mainstream platform, immediately these guys jump into action to put out another story that say, oh, documents are coming. We got this big story. It's like, it looks contrived. And the fact that Lou Elizondo is now coming out and talking about these ablative materials and these layered, he's trying to get scientific because people want this information. They know it's out there, and they have to like give up more and more of their hand to the public, but they're also doing the same operation because it's showing the public that they're not paying attention to us. We don't matter, so that this doesn't exist in the public consciousness and mindset. And this is what we're talking about instead. So this must matter more, right? So
it's narrative control, right?
It's perfect narrative control. It's a limited hangout operation, and people in this we're like saying, oh, I look at who's here already, and I could tell that this is going to be a limited hangout operation. And baby, you've come to the wrong place. We're going to tell you right now, all right, if this was a limited hangout, I wouldn't tell you about this, and Elizondo will never ever tell you about this.
And real quick, I want to jump in because I wanted to say too that I want to know your opinion too, but it feels like for me that I come into the scene, I'm talking about warp drives and wormholes, and then I'm talking about free energy. This stuff is like outside the paradigm. I hadn't heard like anybody in the UFO community aside from like niches like you guys even approach these concepts. And then next thing I know is Lou Elizondo's talking about to Glenn Beck. And now just yesterday he's talking to Jesse Michaels and he's dropping free energy. And it's like they are trying to get ahead of the narrative because otherwise they're losing control of it. And now these people that they don't have control of are talking about it, right?
Bingo. That's what they want. And that's what they're doing. I'm glad that people are realizing it. I want to point out one thing, and then I think David Chester is going to join us very shortly. I have a strange feeling. But Dayton, Ohio, 2,500 pages of classified documents this guy had taken home. All right, he's a 36-year-old physicist who worked at Wright-Patterson Wright State University for the Air Force Research Labs. He was doing classified research at the terahertz and ultra-fast photonics lab. And he wrote his PhD thesis and several of his papers that are published on Wright State University. I did a deep dive into this a couple years ago. This guy was researching polariton condensates and these trapped light inside of materials. And it turns out that, well, these polariton condensates, these create something called negative mass exciton polaritons induced by dissipative light matter coupling in an atomically thin semiconductor. Okay, does that sound interesting for warp drive?
It sounds very relevant, and especially when you start talking about semiconductors, because what people don't realize too is that they all think it's going to be this big thing. They think like a SpaceX rocket. The secret, a lot of this technology is getting as small as possible, getting as close to the quantum scales as you can. And that's where the semiconductors and the microchips come into play. And not to go all MH370, but I was looking back into the Freescale Semiconductor employees the other night, thinking maybe there's something else I can find. And it turns out that deal they had in 2013 with the U.S. Aerospace and Defense was connected to high frequency and ultra high frequency radio power needs, which is, you know, just basically super high frequency electromagnetic waves. Which I just thought, and it was on semiconductors. So it's like you look at that and you're like, huh. The more we start to talk about the physics here, I think people start to realize like that's really what this is all about.
They have billions of dollars missing from the Pentagon budget. We have no idea where that money went. The research is out there. And now we're talking to some really brilliant people in the physics community. I'm going to bring David Chester in right now. David Chester is a PhD from, is it UCLA or California?
Yeah, that's correct.
And your bachelor's is from MIT?
Correct.
Awesome. Yes. So yeah, I know your number was from Boston, Mass. When you called me, I was like, oh, 617. I'm like, this guy's from Boston? I was like, yeah, you got your phone when you were a student up here, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Got to hang on to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so thank you for joining us here tonight, and these conversations. We're part of David is part of a team that we've assembled on altpropulsion.com. We have a whole bunch of scientists who are working together on trying to crack this puzzle and see if there's anything to this. Because if there's warp drive and free energy technology, this is billions of dollars, and this is going to save the planet. So it's worth a shot, right? Even if it's total bust, it's worth a shot for us to take this seriously. And I believe that, you know, my work in the fringe science community of trying to, you know, shed light on ideas that have been delegated to the, you know, the far edges of the internet and shadow banned and blacklisted and blasphemed in universities across the United States. But yet these theories and these, you know, engineers persist on. There's always someone doing free energy. There's always someone, you know, claiming anti-gravity and free energy stuff out there on the internet all the time. And so we decided to create a panel of experts that would help with disclosure on a scientific level to really dig into the science, the scientists, try to interview them. And we've created quite the community here on APEC. I think I don't know. I don't know, Ashton, do you think that what we're doing is the right direction here, trying to get the scientists together and you know, merge these communities and these ideas, and then also prove it out, you know, so that we can, does this seem like a good path to cut through all the disclosure and disinfo nonsense that's out there?
Yeah, I think my opinion is absolutely. I mean, I remember finding your guys' channel a year ago, honestly, and I was like, oh, wow, there's actually people out here who are trying to do this in general. I think that, in my opinion, the problem with how this is so difficult is just academia in general. And this isn't a slight to you guys or APEC or anything like that at all, but I just think that in general, the peer review process has failed us. I think that it was noble in terms of what we were trying to accomplish, which is that I want to see your scientific ideas peer reviewed by other people. I want to see the experimentation. I want to see it with my own eyes, reproducible. Absolutely, there's nothing wrong with that at all. But I think that what's happened is that the people that want to hide this stuff they know the process and they know the ways to discredit the process. So some ways that they do that is they don't let you publish your papers. That's happened to Salvatore Paez. They will, if they do, they will ridicule your papers, and ridicule is an extremely powerful form of disinformation. And then the other thing that I've seen relatively recently,
they also let bullshit be published too. Like this was in the Bogdanov affair in 2002, just shot a hole through all the journals in physics, and really like was the start of the downfall, in my opinion, of the corruption in academia being exposed. You know,
and like I'll give you guys real examples. So there is a paper by Harold Sonny White, who's with NASA, about anomalous thrust with respect to the EM drive. I mean, as far as I know, that paper stands out there. You can still find it. But then other people go ahead and they just say, oh, well, that was just because there was some kind of temperature issue going on, or it can be explained by temperature, but they don't. Like, it's not really like proven. It's just they throw that idea out there and then it muddies the waters, and now nobody goes down that road anymore. They say, oh, that was debunked, you know. But at the end of the day, if that
they tried to scale up the effect and the simulations didn't match the data anymore. So it seems like there's something not figured out yet. I mean, like a lot of times what happens is scientists are skeptical, and this is very common. It's very common to claim that you have some fantastical effect, and then it turns out there's some error that you haven't accounted for. So it's pretty standard procedure to try to suggest what those things might be, so you can try to rule them out. I mean, because that's part of the process, is like you should try to state what all the common things are that should be ruled out, and a lot of times that doesn't occur with the more fantastical claims. And so, you know, at the end of the day, some people are more skeptical, some are more optimistic about these things, but yeah, I mean, it's just an open
but there's a lot of pseudo debunking that goes on in the community, where you have like these people that just desperately are biased against the truth, don't want to believe, or they have like a website which is based around, you know, like Snopes, for example, was caught, you know,
that site's
stories out because there's a high demand for, you know, people debunking certain information. So if you provide that demand, it doesn't matter if, you know, you have the actual product. So some people just want that link to the Snopes article so they can say, no, this was debunked, and they don't actually.
My point overall is just that you see now that we've built this giant hurdle to pass over for the truth, which I think a lot of people would say that's the right way to do it. But then the problem is, well, what if that prevents things that are really real from getting over that hump? Because people then just make claims to say that it's not really real. And so how do we really filter out the stuff that, you know, is actually there? And so, for example, the EM drive thing, then I guess the answer is other people do it, like Charles Bueller, right? He got a lot of attention recently. They did watch a bunch of their clips. They did like 3,000 experiments. They're convinced that it works. And then there's also the Q thruster, which was sent up into outer space November 2023. And then mysteriously, they just lost contact with it. And it took them 3 months to announce that they had lost contact and never got to test it. And so you start to see, if hypothetically that's all real and that works, you know, how easy was it for them to hide it? They just had to have somebody come out and discredit Sonny White and say that, oh, temperature was the reason. They had to have
incredible, you know, Neil Tyson or anyone they could have just to say something. But
with
cold fusion, for example,
fund him, right? You don't fund Charles Bueller, and now how does his research continue? And then with the Q thruster thing, maybe there's sabotage going on there. I mean, and again, I'm just speaking hypothetically, but you start to see, like, man, now we've got it's pretty tough to, if this stuff is real, to really get it out there, especially when you have people actively working against you.
Well, there's also cases like Dr. Eugene Maloff, where he exposed that MIT threw a party for the death of cold fusion before they actually had their results from the lab. So they were already like determined to debunk this before they even looked at the science. And Eugene Maloff showed that, and then he got killed. Some people think he was murdered. There's also the Marconi scientist death conspiracy. Have you ever heard of that?
I haven't heard that one.
the GEC Marconi scientists, a string of, from 1982 to 1990, a number of British-based GEC Marconi scientists and engineers who worked on the Stingray torpedo project, United States Strategic Defense Initiative related projects, died under mysterious circumstances. Well, that's certainly curious. What were they working on for GEC Marconi over in the UK? And is that connected with any of the technologies that were absorbed in those the orbs, doing these weird things? These are space-based weapons systems. Think about it.
Yeah, one thing too, just my experience is I used to think that a lot of the people that were pushing free energy over unity type devices were like fraudsters and scammers. I used to think that Stanley Meyer was, for example. And now I've come to realize that I think a lot of them were actually legit. I think Stanley Meyer was legit. I think that he figured out negative energy could break hydrogen and oxygen bonds down. I think that John Bandini was legit. John Cyril, I think, was legit. I think that they all just realized that magnetism is directly connected to this 0 point energy, and that you can kind of froth it up, and then it's a matter of capturing it. John Bandini, I think, is probably one of the most legit. If you watch a lot of his videos, seems like a very credible and serious guy. And he's got some ideas out there for how you could capture the energy.
Magnetic, David, or do you think it's something more exotic, like in the math of like how the universe is constructed on the core level?
Well, I think there's something deeper to electromagnetism in general. So you could there's still like this electric and magnetic quality, but I think there's something kind of under the hood that has largely been overlooked. That's kind of been around for over 100 years. Yeah, those Hertz potentials, for instance.
Right. Yeah, we were talking about this last night, which was if anyone wants to dig into that stream, we go into some of this stuff too. I don't know. I'm not sure if did you watch the stream with on Candace Owens, David?
Oh, I did not get a chance to watch that one.
All right, I just didn't know if why don't we give Ashton a chance to talk about the physics, and because I like to give Ashton a chance to talk about some of the stuff, and then give you a chance to respond to it. We also mentioned a lot of stuff. I don't know if there's anything else we talked about that you wanted to respond to, like my research into this guy who got arrested. That they tried to cover it up and say that he was like growing marijuana plants, but why would the Air Force OSI show up and not the DEA? It was a really strange story how this started, and then we found out this guy is working on classified programs and got convicted of bringing documents home. So what was he working on that was so classified? You go in and find out it's U.S. Air Force stuff connected to Wright-Patterson. It's terahertz wave technology, which I thought was like, I sent this story to all the guys reporting on, the TTSA stuff. And, even Elizondo, I'm pretty sure I've sent this story to, and the guy hasn't said a word about it. Isn't that strange? The guy who's, telling people that he's got these metamaterials that work on terahertz technology and they're all about disclosure, yet he wouldn't report on or talk about this story.
Yeah, you got to realize too that a lot of those guys just don't know anything about science, and I think it's not that they couldn't understand it. I think that a lot of people just think that they can't understand it unless they're a quote unquote expert.
Right.
But the thing about physics especially is that it's a matter of our observable reality and comprehending that. I always tell people to start with the double slit experiment because it's, in my opinion, the most serious in physics. Go ahead.
Honestly, I think it's really hard to understand physics or communicate it on a level like with other physicists unless you've like had the technical training, unless you've gone, through some, it's really difficult, to find somebody who's, and I don't know, do you know of any breakthroughs that have come from, in physics from someone like just completely outside of, formal training or anything? Has there been?
Oliver Heaviside was self-taught.
Yeah, I guess so. Right.
Yeah, there's people that are self-taught. There's not a lot of people doing what you guys or I'm doing, and I'm certainly mostly self-taught. You know, I business major, economics. But yeah, it's few and far between, as you guys know from seeing on social media and what have you. There's not a lot of people like that. So I guess what I would start with is, the first question I think anyone should ask is, do you believe that there are UFOs out there? And I mean, not aliens or whatever, but literally just unidentified flying objects that have anomalous propulsion, kind of as shown by the DoD Navy videos that were declassified in 2017. And so therefore I'm saying, you know, don't believe any of these UFO advocates, but just like the government said, we've got these videos. We don't know what they are. We don't see any visible propulsion coming off of them. I believe that there are UFOs and things flying out there. Do I know what they all are? No. But what's important, and I know, Jeremy, you weren't too pleased with this clip that I posted, but I think that Ken Wheeler brought up a really good point, which is, if you've got this thing flying up there and it's hovering and it's achieving these extremely fast, potentially hypersonic or faster speeds, where is that energy source coming from? Because conventional physics would say we've got to abide by E equals MC squared. And the amount of energy, just to hover. I mean, fighter jets in general, our most advanced fighter jets, I think their fuel only lasts for like an hour. So, and that's to achieve some speeds that in some cases are hypersonic. So if these things are staying out there for more than an hour, hovering, floating, etc., how are they pulling that off? As far as I know, just, you know, and this, I haven't done the exact math, but I would speculate with a high level of confidence, there's no substance, period, that they could be storing inside of there, especially because the more energy you need, the more mass you need, and that just keeps weighing you down, and therefore you need more and more energy for the more and more mass that you've got going on.
Okay, so, a couple things. Let me address it point by point, right? One, this assumes that these are real physical objects operating, you know, with under intelligent control. That they're not projections. They're not laser projections, because laser projections can go faster than the speed of light. They can go from 0 to Mach 3. They can make 90-degree turns. They can do all that stuff, right? So we're making sure that we're actually talking about real physical objects that do this. And when it comes to UFOs, you know, I like to point out that the Nazis, we brought Operation Paperclip, we brought invisibility over technology over from the Nazis during Operation Paperclip. In the 1940s, the Nazis cracked invisibility technology, like basic radar invisibility with the U-480. You can look up the stealth sub U-480. If you search for that on Google, you'll find the whole article and everything about it. Now, what's interesting is that in 1946, nuclear magnetic resonance was discovered. That's what Edward Mills Purcell won the Nobel Prize for. And the CIA later hired Edward Mills Purcell to run Project Rainbow, which was the CIA's invisibility project for them. So the CIA has been working on invisibility technology out at Area 51 since the 1950s. So where are they in terms of that? And if they had, you know, advanced drones, could they make them invisible? I mean, what are, you know, so the state of this technology and where it's at, people have no idea what they're looking at and what they're seeing when it comes to UFOs. And I put together this 200-page technical intelligence summary going over the history of all this, and just some slides with links and sources to additional information and where they can find, you know, where developments were at least, you know, from the scientific perspective. You know, I don't know that we've had complete invisibility. This Mirage Effect thing is really neat, that can hide objects using, you know, the Mirage, the same thing that bends light during a Fata Morgana or the Flying Dutchman effect. You can bend light using heat waves and heating up layers of area at a certain angle to the incident light beam. And we just have a new join in the back room here. Dave, you want to?
I'm just here to listen. Great to see you guys. I'm just here to listen. That's
hey.
All right,
Dave, welcome to the party.
All right. Yes. Thank you. I'm glad you guys are here, because there's a ton of technologies that have you know, we've come out and covered. I'll post this presentation and the links in the description of this video if people want to open that up and check that out.
So if I could respond to that, though, I mean, even if you're making an invisible, the object's still there. So I think we can take one assumption, assume that there is a physical object there. I mean,
Right.
okay, maybe there,
If
of
we
course, people
assume-
talk about this talking plasma and these projections, but
Let's
I mean,
assume that these are carrier craft
Yeah.
for aliens, that they're
let's assume
flying
there's
around
something there. Yeah,
in the
right.
warp drive.
If that's the
how are they
case,
powering?
yeah, where's that power coming? I think that should be the first question people ask. To me, it can only be coming from the environment. It has to be coming from around us somewhere. There's no jets attached to it. There's not enough space inside to have the mass necessary. And especially if they're coming from Alpha Centauri or the Andromeda galaxy or whatever, now the energy levels are like, you know, through the roof. So to me, that's the big question right off the bat, which tells me there's something about our universe that there's an energy source that we don't currently either accept or understand at the moment.
Yeah, we certainly don't understand everything. There's certainly a lot we don't understand.
Well, that's important too, because I think a lot of people have this view that like we've got it all figured out. And if we realize that we don't have it all figured out right now, I think that our level of confidence in our current understanding of science and physics in general should, you know, we should be a little bit humble about it, because, you know, when you look at the history of science, it was this quote from this patent that I was looking at. It's like, basically every scientist has been proven wrong throughout history, and everybody was confident that they had it all figured out. And it's not that we throw out everything else before. It's like we build on top of it, right? We say, oh, we need to interpret this slightly different than how we interpreted it before. In fact, the quote, I think Dave Rossi here, was that, you know, it's a new perspective on old physics. And that's how I look at it. You know, there's people like this one Jason guy in my replies who's always like, no, I all the old physics is wrong. We have to redo it all. And that's not really been my view. My view is like, I don't think it's that we have to redo the physics or the math. I think it's more of a matter of we have to redo our perspective of the universe itself. And I think that if you do that, we're going to be able to improve. We're going to be able to improve our understanding.
Yeah, a lot of times how it works is the current paradigm is kind of an approximation within the next paradigm. So it's, you know, you can still have breakthroughs in mathematics and physics and have this completely new paradigm of physics that's completely different. And yeah, a lot of times it might have different intuition behind it. And then, you know, because we have figured out a lot of things have been successful. So a lot of times you go and take some limit and realize you can recover that, right? If you go to basically like the weak gravitational limit of general relativity, you can recover Newtonian gravity. So in that way, the hope is that we kind of keep expanding our knowledge layer by layer. And, you know, really everyone's hoping one day we'll get to this theory of everything. But I kind of think of it as just what's the next approximation. I don't really try to focus too much on finding the final theory. It's just really just stay humble and just what's the next step to take so we can make further progress.
Yeah, and don't assume that everything we've been taught or think we know is, you know, true, because that's like the one we could be basing our, you know, perceived understandings on false knowledge.
So let me jump to another point then, which would be, and I, you know, just to throw it out there, I'm a full believer that 0-point energy is the answer, and potentially the Great Unifier, if you want to think of it, which would be Kaluza-Klein, 1926. There's an extra dimension that unifies gravity and electromagnetism. I think this dimension is what Tesla would have referred to as the radiant energy, what Maxwell would have referred to as the ether, and that it's at a level that's the Planck scale. Almost imperceivable to us, but it's out there all the time, all around us. And it begs the question, where does energy actually even come from? Like when I have my light on or this light right behind me, is the energy actually going at the speed of light from the power plant through all the wires to my apartment here and to this light? That doesn't seem correct to me. It was the Veritasium video which first woke me up to this, where he talks about how does electricity flow. And he shows very clearly that the electricity is not directly flowing through the wires. The electrons are producing a field, and then the electricity, the energy is flowing through the field, which can be odd when you consider like an extremely long circuit where now you can have the power from the capacitor or the battery flow directly to the light bulb through the medium and not through the wires at all. Yeah, there it is. Energy doesn't flow through wires. And this was very controversial there was a bunch of electrical engineers that came out and said, this isn't possible. It breaks causality. This doesn't really work. And it goes to show that there's a lot of really smart people out there that we don't really have this very great understanding of energy in general. So one last point I'll make on it is, Tesla is credited with having invented the alternating current generator, which, if we think of it in the basic form, is just hand cranking a generator where we take a copper wire and we spin it through a magnetic field. This changes the pointing vector, so the current flows back and forth based on when the coil is spinning around through the magnetic field. Now, the interesting part about this is that I think conventional physics would say you're converting the various forms of energy, like kinetic energy, into electrical energy. Or if it's like a steam turbine or a wind turbine, you're converting the steam, you're converting the wind into energy and electricity. But is it really, are we really converting steam? Are we really converting wind into energy? If you really do something I would call, so I work in healthcare IT, and we learn how to get to the root cause of a problem. We used to play this game when we were in training. It was like, you talk to somebody and they say something like, my TV's broke, my TV doesn't work. And then you have to keep getting down to find the root cause, and eventually you find out, oh, well, it's not plugged in, or, something like that, right? And when you do that with an AC generator and you say, where's the energy coming from? You realize what's really making the energy flow is a time variable. First, it's oriented like this when you're spinning the copper wire, and then it flips the other direction. And this is what's allowing the energy to, for lack of a better term, manifest and exist. It doesn't matter that I'm spinning it with my hand, or that wind is blowing it, or that steam is turning it. At the end of the day, what matters is the copper wire is changing its orientation over time,
in the presence of a stationary magnetic field.
Exactly.
That it needs that. It's not just the V; it's the V cross B part of the Lorentz force that's creating it.
But that's big, because if you want to understand, like, where's the energy coming from, then if you look at it from that perspective, you go, well, maybe there's another way. Maybe now it's just an engineering problem. Maybe now it's a situation where we just have to figure out another way to get that same effect. And what is that effect doing? I think Tom Bearden would have said it's keeping your dipole open is what that's doing. Creating an asymmetry where you have more charge on one side than we have on the other. And that's what allows the circuit to flow and that energy to exist.
So the way Tesla did it, I mean, you realize, this is Faraday going back, to 100 years more, before, 50 years before Tesla. A single wire, he notices the magnetic field going around the wire, when you put a current through it. So, how do you double up that? How do you create more? Well, you coil it around a nail, that's, everyone learns that in like elementary school when we play around with this stuff, play around with some wire and batteries and basics of it, right? So that coil in a stationary magnetic field, and then you physically have to turn it, and it puts up those eddy currents, same way the magnetic drops through the copper tube, it slows down. So the same way that it's pushing back on you as you're trying to crank this generator. So you have to put energy into that generator to rotate that coil around inside that magnetic stator, and then that magnetic stator holds the electrons kind of in place, and they'll have to push through the wire, right? So that's just, I'm not playing a debunker part. I'm playing like, this is just basically what you learn in school if you go to school for understanding electricity. If you, they teach this at the IBEW or on basic courses. This isn't even college level stuff. I mean, really.
But yeah, so the important part too then is that, and this is something I've been thinking on, maybe you have the answer to, is that, can you, if the energy is really being converted, like when I'm spinning the rotor or whatever I'm doing there in order to produce that energy from the AC generator, is there an equation that would tell me exactly how much, what's the conversion rate?
Right. Well,
without knowing the type of the generator is, right? Because I would argue that it depends on what kind of generator you have, the efficiency, the size, etc. But if that's the case, then is it really my hand that's doing the generation of the energy, or is it the actual generator itself that's manifesting the energy?
Well, how do you get the AC current without cranking it? How are you going to get that time varying property?
And that's an interesting point. So this is getting a little bit ahead of where I wanted to go, but one of the most interesting patents that I found is Casmir cavities from Garrett Model and Bernard Haish. And when you boil it down and you look at the universe as having this extra dimension of energy in it, the way that the Casmir cavity really works, if you're going to dumb it down for the people, for everybody who doesn't really know that much about electrical engineering, not, is that you're essentially squeezing the energy. You're squeezing out a little bit of the energy as it goes through the conductor, insulator conductor portion of it, squeezing a little bit of energy out. And then when it goes to the cavity portion, which is just an area of space, the energy flows back up again, almost like a trampoline, where like you bounce on the trampoline. Do you have to pull the trampoline back up? No. Nature itself has the springs and the tension in the springs, the stress of the springs pulls the trampoline back up. Or another example would be like the ocean. If I was pulling like a cup of water out of the ocean, is there going to be a gap in there? Do I have to make the ocean go back up? No, it automatically goes back up due to the nature of the stress in the ocean itself, or however you want to look at it. So what I think of in this case is that the energy, the sea of energy all around us, naturally equalizes. We don't have to pay to re-equalize it. And this is how I think essentially the Casmir cavities are functioning, is that they're pulling a little bit out. They're changing the orbital of the electron just a little bit. That squeezes a little bit of energy out. And then the atom goes into the open cavity, and it gets that energy back naturally from the equilibrium. And so that's how I would look at, how can we pull the energy? How can we cheat the system? So instead of, it's like, I almost think that the AC generate things like caveman technology. Tesla figured that out 100 years ago, and that's still the basis of all of our energy. As opposed to looking at the root cause is creating this little quick asymmetry, pulling a little bit of energy out, and then letting nature, go ahead and give us the energy back.
So if you're going to make a machine from Casmir effect, one of the difficult things, I don't think physicists haven't been able to even build a machine to measure the Casmir effect efficiently or effectively, because it's just so hard to create such a flat metal surface and then get them so close together without touching, but not touching, just barely,
I think they've done it with a sphere and a plate.
Yeah, right.
Ludwig. I don't know if you saw the Thorsten Ludwig video about 0-point energy, but that's exactly what he mentions. He mentions they do a little sphere and a plate, and they're talking scales that are practically microscopic. And the big problem is that if you get it too close, it gets stuck together. But another thing that he points out is you could use a tuning fork to prevent that problem. And if you use a tuning fork, so you imagine a tuning fork next to, so we have this, let's say we have this wall, and now I have a tuning fork next to it. The closer it gets, there's going to be a vibration in the tuning fork, and you can measure the frequency of the vibration. And as it gets closer and closer, that frequency is going to increase more and more. And so that's the way that Thorsten Ludwig, yes, in this exact video, he talks about how they're able to measure the Casmir force, is that they, instead of using the ball, it's probably near the end actually, where he starts talking about that part of it, like right there, somewhere in this range, somewhere along here, he starts to mention that they can use a tuning fork as an application of it, which I thought was really interesting. Yeah, like that. We're getting close, somewhere around here in general. Actually, no, this is where he's talking about Ken's shoulders and plasma. So not to get too far ahead, but
I haven't seen this before, so I'll have to check this out.
Yeah, there's the tuning fork right there. Boom. There it is.
There it is.
So he talks about, then measuring the frequency change of the tuning fork. And that way you prevent the issue of the ball. The other problem with doing the ball mechanism is that it would snap and it would break as well. And the thing about the Casmir force is a lot of people think that the Casmir force is very weak, but at very small scales, it gets to be very strong, to the degree where in electron microscopy, they have to be very careful about any two small metal plates even coming close to one another. Because once they get stuck, like, how do you get that thing apart? It's so small, you can't like actually get it apart again. And this is where I think that it makes so much sense with 0-point energy. If 0-point energy is really at the Planck scale, then the secret really is getting it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And even the Casmir force, it abides by the inverse square law. So actually the energy level is increasing exponentially the smaller and smaller you get it. So really the key to the Casmir force isn't making it bigger and bigger and bigger. It's actually making it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And then, you know, for me, what I would do is I would make it on a tiny microchip. Like you guys have seen these videos on Twitter and stuff where they like zoom in on the microchips, and it's like a whole like series of like microchip processor inside of a processor. And then I would scale it up again and be like, okay, you make that a tiny level, and then you make it bigger and bigger, make a, you know, a wafer out of it or something. And this brings us back to the free scale semiconductor scientists. I'm going, man, once you start to look at this type of science, if this is really something that is fruitful, it's like those people, they had a patent for optimizing the number of dies on a wafer. You're like, huh, that's interesting, right? Because that's how you would scale it up after you've scaled it down to these very small levels.
Very interesting. So if these free scale semiconductor scientists, you know, may have been on to, you know, some of these types of the actual manufacturing end of some of these classified technologies, that would be a reason to get rid of them.
Oh, 100%. And let me throw a couple other thoughts at you here. The first one is, you know, you talked about in the beginning of this, like, you know, it's worth looking into this because it could, you know, end our reliance on fossil fuels, like, you know, free energy for everybody, abundance for everybody. But what if it's also, you know, a doomsday weapon? Like, what if this is a situation where, I mean, infinite energy, it's pretty simple. Like, you guys are physicists. You understand that really a lot of what holds us back with respect to some of these exotic ideas for propulsion, et cetera, are we need this huge amount of energy. Like, if we want to make a wormhole, but we need mass energy equivalent of Jupiter. Well, if you have infinite energy, like, to me, the logical conclusion, well, I can now screw wormhole. I can make a black hole now, you know? And it's like, well, if that's the case, you could see why A, we would hide it, you know, B, why it would be hidden under the Atomic Secrecy Act, and then C, why whichever government figured it out first, you'd do anything to prevent the other ones from figuring it out. So if China or Russia, Iran, North Korea, any of these other people are trying to figure this out, you might want to wipe them out. And this is where Lou Elizondo today, I just posted a clip where finally he's talking about, he basically mentioned this. He says, you know what, do you guys want to watch the clip real quick? I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts. I have it.
Yeah,
ready.
if you want to, you can share your screen and make sure you do the one with the sound or whatever, so you can play it.
It should be there. Go ahead and play that.
Or unlock more than the destructive force.
I think I'll save that when I'm not mic'd up.
Yeah, no worries.
Think of mass and energy as the same thing.
So you need to get Planck scale energy or something.
A common theme here is we keep talking about the term national security. And I know you're here to interview me, but let me interview you just for a moment, if I may, if you'll indulge me. How do we? This is a sandbox here, right? Let's say there's a technology now. There's a toy that there's 12 kids in the sandbox, but there's only one toy, right? This toy has the ability to let everybody play together and be nice. The problem is human nature is such that most kids, most governments in this case, using it as an analogy, are going to want that toy for themselves. How do we share the toy? How do we use this? Because we know there's countries out there that if they had a certain type of technology, they would probably employ it very quickly to their advantage. So countries will use technology if they feel that they have to in a time of conflict. The world is on fire. Doesn't matter what side of the argument you're on. I think we can all agree that the world is a very dangerous and violent place right now, right? This technology has the chance to either bring us together or completely rip us apart once and for all, right? Like there's no coming back. How do you solve that problem? Who's going to take the moral high road and say, I give to you this technology and you shall use it for peaceful means? Who is that? The United Nations?
I think it's
Is it society writ large?
It's like the three-body problem. They know we're going to blow ourselves up, so they clamp down on the science, and they're responsible for a lot of the productive science.
Would humanity be okay with an overlord, an NHI babysitter? Is
What?
that freedom? are you really free then if an NHI were to come down and say, okay, folks, this is a reality, ha ha ha, we've been kind of playing with you a little bit, but here's reality. You're all going to play well with each other. You're all going to be able to enjoy this free energy and whatnot, but you're going to play by our rules. Now what happens? Now what happens to free will?
So yeah, I mean, to me, I'm not a big fan of Lou Elizondo in general because I do think he's a counter intel guy. But this is the first time I've ever really heard him talk like this on any of these podcasts, and he's done the whole circuit on MSM on every single one. And just to let people know, I've been talking to Jesse in private here and there, and I've been talking to him about the science and physics and about the implications of this because I really do think like what Lou Elizondo just mentioned. I think this technology can be the end of the world. Like that's how powerful I think free energy would be in general. So this is the part where I just think that you've got to be very careful about what the implications of this really means. A lot of people go, well, we've got nuclear weapons and we haven't destroyed ourselves, which sure, you're right. But at the same time, this is something that makes nuclear weapons look like little firecrackers. This is a situation where pretty much anyone in the world could have a device like the size of your phone or a briefcase where that could just be goodbye planet. You know, if it's really true that we can pull energy, harness it from all around us, if we can amplify that energy. And so then one other thing I want to kind of throw out there is if you look at a lot of these free energy devices that are out there, the people that I think are credible, you find there's some very stark commonalities. You find that they claim to produce over unity, coefficient of performance greater than 1. They claim to reduce mass. So you could say that's an anti-gravity type effect. And they also claim to have a cooling effect. To me, all of those are answered by 0-point energy as being the source of gravity. Because if you pull energy out of a region, it's going to cool down. If you pull energy out of a region and you polarize the vacuum or engineer the vacuum, as Hal Puthoff would say, then you are manipulating gravity and therefore mass. And then also, if you're pulling that energy out, you have to still abide by conservation of energy, which means if you pull that energy out, it's got to go somewhere. This is where I think Dirac would have said that ether of energy is negative energy. And then we are in this equilibrium and we just pull it out and it's still just normal energy, but it's like we're pulling it out from the quantum scale and we're turning it into usable energy at the macroscopic scale. What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I would like David maybe to respond.
Well, I mean, yeah, I'd say I agree with a lot of what you're saying. But then, there's just like little details like just because if something's cooling, then that means that there's heat energy going into something. So in principle, if there's energy in the vacuum, you're pulling it out. I mean, it wouldn't need to cool, but yeah, it is true that there's a lot of claims of things cooling. So there's something there. I mean, I'm kind of interested in that because that extended electrodynamics theory, how I kind of got into it at first was it was claimed to be used for thermoelectricity. And so I found that a little curious, but yeah, I mean, going back to the ether, just to start there, I mean, originally it was just this idea that there's this medium filling 3 dimensions of space. That's the way Maxwell looked at it because typically, you have a water wave. I mean, this is stuff I'm sure everyone on the call knows. But, it's like, okay, so I'm curious to learn more about your picture of this 5th dimension. I mean, I've studied Kaluza-Klein theory to some degree, but you're saying that the ether is the 5th dimension. So, what does that mean for the conventional view of the ether being this medium filling space? And how does that relate to the 5th dimension?
Yeah, I'd say because it's at the Planck scale or a scale below our perceptible level, that's, to me, that's an extra dimension, something that we don't perceive. We just use dimensions to explain our reality. So, you've got up, down, left, right, forward, and back. And our 4th dimension is the time variable that we've got. And then the 5th dimension to me is one that we don't actively see and perceive, but we know is out there because we have effects that we have to be able to measure. And that is where the idea of it unifies the quantum mechanics and the 0-point energy, which would be the Lamb shift, where Lamb won the Nobel Prize for his experiments with the Lamb shift. But I think the best evidence is how Puthoff's hydrogen atom at rest, which would say, well, why is it that a hydrogen atom, when it's at rest, isn't radiating energy? Since we know from quantum mechanics, it's never actually stopped. And this also opens up the idea of like the Zitrabuagong. At small scales, nothing's ever really stopped. If I were to take a pendulum and swing it back and forth, even when it looks like it's stopped, it's still moving a little bit. But why is it not radiating energy then for the hydrogen atom? To me, the answer has to be that it must be in an equilibrium state where it is, either being sucked out or pulled in at the same rate where it's stuck there. If that's the case, there must be something else there. Now, we don't really see it, but we can see the effects on that small scale.
So that
it's like infolded in our dimension or outfolded, however you want to think about it.
Yeah, so that fifth dimension could be compactified, so you could have these little circles everywhere that are at the microscopic scale, and maybe there's energy flowing in there. I posed this to a string theorist once. I said, okay, so this was when I was more skeptical of string theory. Now I'm a little more open-minded about it. I said, okay, so you believe in extra dimensions? And he's like, yeah, duh. It's like, all right, so can energy exist in these extra dimensions? It's like, well, yeah. It's like, okay, so can energy rotate from the extra dimensions to our physical dimensions? I mean, like if I have kinetic energy in one direction, it can rotate to another direction. It's not a problem. It's like, yeah. I was like, oh, okay, so wouldn't that mean that string theory has like technological applications for harnessing energy if there's all this energy in extra dimensions? And it's like, no. That's when they start getting all nervous. They're like, oh, well, you see, it would oscillate back and forth, and then you wouldn't be able to do anything with it because it would be happening too fast. And I mean, it's kind of similar to alternating current. At first, people were saying, well, yeah, okay, maybe you could get these currents to oscillate up and down, but how are you going to do anything with it? It sounds too much like a free energy device. And I mean, maybe it's not a free energy device. I mean, maybe it's just an energy reservoir device, Maybe there's just energy there.
See, I love that view, David, because free energy is a big misconception. And I think it's almost like the term UFO, where people don't like to use the term UFO now. They call it UAP because it's got this stigma associated to it. Free energy has the same problem. People have this stigma associated with free energy. One stigma is that's impossible. It violates the laws of thermodynamics, right? Which isn't necessarily true if it's just a reservoir and it's tapping into the reservoir. The other stigma people have with free energy is, from the common perspective, is, oh, well, that just means energy's free. But even if there's this reservoir of unlimited energy, which is really what free energy means, is that you have this supply is infinite. That's what's free. And it doesn't mean the cost to extract it's free. You still have to build, you have to have some mechanism, pump, some device, whether that be a magnetic motor or if you've got,
engine, Carnot cycle. Yeah. There's lots of ways you can take a reservoir of energy going from, high potential to low potential, whether it's hot to cold, a train up going down a hill, or what have you. It's all potential and kinetic energy,
And Jeremy,
exactly the same way we're like a hydroelectric dam, or even wind. It's like people have no problem with opening their system up to nature, but then you're like, well, I want to open it up to the quantum vacuum. I want to open it up to the ether, to the 0 point energy. And then they're like, oh, no, wait a minute, hold up. But that's the part where I think that if we open our minds to that, I think we don't have to redo all of physics. I think that we look at that and we go, oh, there is a reservoir out there, and it's not this small amount. Generally, this is the vacuum catastrophe, right? Which is like how much energy is really out there. You've got Richard Feynman and John Archibald Wheeler saying there's enough energy in a tiny area to vaporize all the oceans in the world, which you're like, okay, that's a huge amount. But then you've got other people like, I think Lawrence Krauss might be one of them, saying, no, it's too small. We can't tap into that tiny amount of energy. Well, there's got to be, something's got to give. Both of those can't be true at the same time. And if it is that there is this huge amount of energy, then the doors are blown wide open. And this is where I think the reason why you see the Casmir effect named in like every paper about extracting energy from the quantum vacuum is that's the answer. Is that yes, on
every paper,
most papers, let's say a lot, is that yes, on large scales, it would be a very small effect because of the inverse square law. But on very small scales, and the smaller you get it, now that effect starts to get huge. And it starts to get really interesting when you look at the dynamic Casmir effect, which is probably one of the favorite papers I've ever read.
Yeah, that was, I learned about that from Eric Davis's warp drive paper.
So that's the thing. I read a lot of Eric Davis's stuff. I've read a lot of Hal Puthoff's stuff. I'm sure these guys have seen, if there's UFOs out there, these guys have seen them. There's flying saucers that crashed or whatever, and I don't claim to know.
People don't read. I mean, it's all this stuff that I got. People are like, how do you know about these polariton condensates that led you to that Air Force contractor who got arrested? And how'd you put all this together? And it's like, because you got to read the documents, man. You go into that footnote and he's talking about polariton condensates being used for the negative mass, and how do you produce the negative mass for that part? And it's all connected. I feel to some kind of research programs. I don't know. Jack Sarfati is here chiming in.
Oh, Jack, so mad. Okay, but here's the other thing that's crazy is, what if there's not negative mass? But again, mass and energy are interchangeable, right? Because of E equals mc squared. So what if there is negative energy? What if the negative energy is just below sea level, below the equilibrium? Like we were thinking on a graph, like we're going into the negatives, but that's not an exotic substance. It's just us pulling the energy out, just like the trampoline effect. We're bouncing down and it's coming back up. That's our negative energy. And what that might mean then is there isn't such a thing as negative mass, because negative energy just is normal energy. So we wouldn't then necessarily have negative mass. But going back to the dynamic Casmir effect, the thing I think is so crazy about this experiment is that the virtual particles that kind of collide, I almost think of them as like the water that's like kind of jumping out of the ocean a little bit. But it's only there for such a fraction of a second. I think it's like 10 to the minus 21 seconds, which is really, really small. But if they have these mirrors moving fast enough, spinning fast enough, high enough frequency, they can capture them and turn them into real photons. And that, I mean, you're just extracting energy straight out of the vacuum in that scenario. I mean, unless you guys have another interpretation, but that's the only interpretation I can come up with it. And you go, wow, like that's a really, really interesting effect.
Well, it's worth at least highlighting why a lot of people think it's not possible to extract energy from the vacuum. And it relates to this idea that the 0-point energy is in the ground state. So if there's nothing lower, then how do you take the energy out? Because if you were to take the energy out, then it would have to go to a lower state. And then people say, oh, well, there's no free energy. And then it was funny, Jeremy was bringing up the page for thermodynamic free energy. There's Helmholtz and Gibbs free energy. And so for the Helmholtz free energy, what that is basically the amount of energy you can extract, the maximal amount before, when you're in a non-equilibrium state, you can extract energy and use it for work. And so I don't know, maybe Jack Sarfati will like this, but there's these Bohmian approaches where you can have maybe there's this particle and a wave. And so what if quantum mechanics is actually in some sense an equilibrium theory? And what if there's some theory beyond quantum mechanics that allows for some non-equilibrium processes, which would allow for some free energy in the thermodynamic sense, such that when you're studying quantum mechanics, all there is this ground state energy and everything's in equilibrium, so there's no way to extract it. So, I mean, at that point, it's just really important to develop that theoretical framework, because otherwise it's going to be difficult to understand.
Yeah, no, and I because I think that's what Lawrence Krauss said, is that you can't do it because there'd be no lower state. But that's not really how I look at the universe. A lot of times, especially in physics, we find there's singularities where it's like you get to that low state or that high state, and what do we see? Then we see a black hole. We create this singularity state that occurs. And what would be the singularity state for extracting energy from the ZPE? I would argue it could be the Schwinger limit, for example. Jack Sarfati hates the Schwinger limit, I found out. But that seems like it's like 10 to the 33 or something like that.
Schwinger limit. There's nothing to do with the Schwinger limit.
No, where'd you go to school, Michael? Where'd you go to school? Schwinger limit's so
you know
stupid.
what, Ashton, I don't blame you, because you're trying to learn this stuff. You're new to this stuff, and I give you a break, even if Jack doesn't. We're trying to work through all this stuff together, and you know, if it has something to do with, you know, it has something to do with all this, I believe, you know, there's a little bit of truth in everything, I believe. So I just try to sort through it to find what the nonsense is and all this, and if we can figure this out, or get some insights into the scientists who may have worked on this through, you know, insights into the science, we could maybe find some of these scientists who've actually worked on this stuff and get this out, because that would be great. No, I decided to, you know, I'm going to get Jack on to next week. Okay. Rather than, if I bring Jack on in this chat, it's just going to deteriorate and take away from what's going on here. So I want to continue with this conversation. Let us be schmucks. Let us be wrong. Let us be fucking idiots. And then Jack can come on next week and put us all to shame with his.
I look forward to his rebuttals, but also,
Yeah,
you know, there must be something below what we think of as absolute zero, because helium-3 doesn't freeze, you know, it doesn't become a solid. This is where we have our superfluids, even though we think we're at absolute zero temperature.
Why?
The only answer there can be there must be something below that at that point. And then it's just a question of what is the bottom? What does that even mean at that point, right?
I mean, just there's also pressure. So, I mean, it's not just temperature. So if you want to get a solid helium, just apply some pressure. I don't see why there has to be like a sub-zero just because superfluid helium exists. I don't know. Is there some fundamental principle that says you must have solids at the lowest point, or what?
Well, because really at the end of the day, it's about your atoms jiggling, right, or moving around. Isn't that what we think in terms of solid
versus degrees of freedom? So degrees of freedom. You know, one point there was an article I think on years ago about just explaining phase changes of matter and in terms of degrees of freedom, right? So when you lose a degree of freedom, like rotation, for example, or gain that's like melting, the ice melting and turning from water to liquid to ice. So phase
you lose
change.
the symmetry. It's a breaking of a symmetry. Like a solid has that translational symmetry. So if you melt it, you lose that symmetry,
right?
And open up different degrees of freedom depending. But yeah, usually it's about the loss of symmetry or the gaining of a symmetry for a phase transition. So I mean, spontaneous symmetry breaking in like quantum field theory is kind of like a phase transition of the quantum vacuum itself.
Yeah, but I mean, my argument is basically that it would have to be some form of energy that must be applied to the helium in order for it to stay in that liquid state instead of going solid.
Well, think about this too, right?
0 point energy, right? There's 0 point energy, and it's just there's I mean, but that's kind of the conventional view on it. So
do you think that has anything to do with the latent heat in materials? Because you know, like when you try to freeze water, for example, it stays at that solid temperature until for a while until you get all that energy out of it, and then after that you pass that latent heat curve, you can actually start extracting the energy out of it. So it's almost like, you know, maybe there's some kind of similarity in why, I don't know, superfluids stay liquid even though you're draining all the energy out of them. So I don't know.
Hey, Dave, do you think the vacuum's a superfluid? What do you think about that, Dave Rossi?
I think it is. I think it is. I just wanted to just for those in the chat that are asking why I'm not talking. I had a long day of flights, and I'm just I just wanted to. I saw the link at the last minute in my email, and I figured I would chime in or join. But I would say it could be a superfluid, the vacuum itself, if you will. But I mean, at the same time, not to what I'm about to say here won't contradict anything that I had just said. However, we do have different layers of the vacuum, of course, right? So Chester, you know probably even better than myself, right? We have the electrodynamic vacuum, we have the chromodynamic vacuum, or vacua, whatever we want to call it. Yeah, I'd say it's interesting. I don't mean to be super quiet tonight, but I won't be saying much this evening. But this is great what you guys are discussing, and I think when you said, for example, latent energy release, Jeremy, in my opinion, I think there's something there. I think that there's more than one way to skin this cat with regards to electromechanical approaches of if we're talking about over unity. I mean, we know, for example, that A lot of common home heat pumps have a coefficient of performance over 1 substantially. Second law of thermo is not violated because what you're doing is you're treating the vacuum as a I guess you could say as a physical interaction, even though it may not entirely be physical at that moment. It would be treated as potentials until it becomes physical in a certain aspect. So you'd be opening up a closed loop system to implement the local vacuum as a form of cyclical energy, heat transfer, and so on and so forth. I think there's one thing I'll say that is going to sound probably crazy to a lot of people, but I'll just say it, is that when you start dealing with this negative energy or these negative energies, what you start having is in the laboratory, you start getting currents that are cold instead of hot. Cold electricity instead of hot electricity. So you start having this balance between hot and cold electricity evening itself out and whatnot, which could potentially explain in some cases the notion of, for example, rotating magnets under specified conditions becoming colder and colder when examined in the laboratory and so on and so forth. But yeah, I'm sorry guys, I'm pretty tired tonight. I just wanted to jump in just because I appreciate Jeremy sending the link, but yeah.
Well, Dave, that sounds a lot like what I think Jeremy was on my stream the other night where we were looking at Deborah Chung, and she was looking at that. She was trying to explain why when the current was going up, the voltage was going down. And she explained it as like the electrons switch directions, is that you have this negative entropy type event happening. Do you think that would be similar to the idea of a cold current?
I think possibly. I mean, for example, we see, for example, that Douglas Torr and Ning Li had postulated that, if I remember correctly, the quantization for angular momentum in superconductors resides in the lattice holes, not the Cooper pairs. So if you can do something to those lattice holes in a way in which the current direction and the time varying current could actually become, how can I put this, can superimpose atop each other, you may get some interesting effects that would have a combination of both hot and cold negative resistance, if you will, which could explain some of what is seen in the laboratory at times. I think that there's also many different scientists, respectively, that label certain things in certain terms or certain observations as something different than what others have already seen in other, private laboratories. And I think that, anywhere from 30 to 50% of what we're dealing with is simply an issue of translation in terms of being able to understand a lot of this, whether it's the theory or the experiment and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty simple. It's scientific method is pretty clear. If an experiment works and all artifacts have been ruled out in every way, shape, and form relative to the resources one has in a high-end laboratory, that means that, for example, the theoretician has to then change their model to fit this new phenomena. It's pretty straightforward in my opinion. Now, again, I'm not saying that even behind the scenes that everything is known, but by no means. I think anyone that claims that they know everything is completely wrong or what have you. But I think when we start getting into these concepts of how, for example, certain people in laboratories have actually gotten frostbite from some of these cold currents, it makes one wonder, okay, are we dealing with something else that may have to do with, again, the Dirac sea, as it's been called, or the vacuum, quantum electrodynamic vacuum, or so on and so forth. It gets interesting.
I want to just, for the people in the chat who are not as smart as some of you physicist guys are here, when Dave's talking about the heat pump thing, this is something there's a lot of controversy about. Is this really over unity or not? Like, because they don't want, everybody's worried about breaking the laws of thermodynamics. The way I look at it is you're using some amount of energy, some small amount of energy, relatively speaking, to move around existing heat energy at a lower cost than it would normally take to just produce that heat with that amount of energy. Is that a right way of thinking about it?
Sure. We can even take it one step further with regards to the fact that certain heat pumps in one's house, if modified, can actually become over unity. I don't want to say generators. I say more so I call them facilitators, because you can argue that the energy is all around us, and so these devices facilitate this transfer of energy more than actually generate it, so to speak. But yeah, no, I'd say so. Yeah, there's, yeah, I would say.
So then with the lattice structure, the way I think about lattice structure, I think about crystals and crystalline structures where it's like you are paving a highway for the electrons to move, where generally the electrons are going to be bumping into things and producing resistance. Is that the right way to think about, producing these metamaterial lattice structure?
Sure, I would. Well, I would say that if, for example, if one polarizes the lattice of a given magnet, crystal, etc., you can get some nonlinear effects when these devices or these crystals or magnets are pulsed in a certain aspect. With, again, it depends on what you're trying to do, right? If it's high voltage or if you're dealing more with photonics and whatnot. But if you can polarize a lattice of a given material, you may start to get effects that otherwise would not be observed in the laboratory if those lattices were symmetrical.
Okay. Yeah. And then the other thing that you just had me thinking about was that I'm not sure a lot of people realize this, but like, what is a magnet, a permanent magnet? A permanent magnet's an alignment of electron spins. So it's like you've got all your soldiers lined up in the same exact direction, and it produces a very powerful effect on the macroscopic scale. And this explains why you can cut your magnet in half and you still have a north and south afterwards, because you still have they're all still aligned in the same direction at that point. And this is really interesting with respect to free energy, because if the universe itself is electrostatic or electric and the 0 point energy can be polarized, then you could be changing something that's random fluctuations into something that's now aligned by passing a magnet through it.
If I could say one last thing, and then unfortunately I have to get going, but one thing I'll leave you guys with is that if you, and I think Ashton, you and I may have discussed this before, but if one looks into or investigates possible negative energy effects inside of semiconductor lattices with inductive loads in particular, you may get some very interesting phenomena from that. There's something with RLC circuits in particular that I think, with the utmost respect, a lot of people miss simply because it seems so trivial, but can be harnessed in a way that, if scaled up and amplified, can induce, we could say, interesting phenomena. Let's call it that. I don't want to make any grandiose claims, if you will, because I don't want to say things that can't be substantiated. And I understand that if certain people say, well, if one person's seen it in a lab and others haven't, then how can it be proven? So I'll leave it at that. But yeah,
Mike Gamble essentially believes that with setups of RLC circuits. He thinks he doesn't even refer to it as over unity or anything, but he was studying Tesla's work.
in my opinion, I would say there's something there. I'm not saying that RLC circuits alone are over unity by any means. I'm saying that when coupled under the right conditions to certain setups, whether it's a Casmir setup or a rotating magnet setup in certain under specified conditions, you then may get some form of excess energy extraction.
Yeah, and I won't pretend to. I mean, I like some of Ken Wheeler's stuff just because I like his approach on magnetism generally and some of the cool visuals he does. But one thing I do agree with him on in terms of why a magnetic motor could produce over unity is that, just like with the AC generator, I look at it in terms of like churning up the ether, churning up the 0 point fluctuations. And this doesn't mean that automatically just by spinning magnets you're going to get over unity. Like, you have to, how are you capturing that energy? Even if I were to churn up the ocean or churn up the lake, I've got to be able to collect that water as it's flying around every direction.
And the water that's collected has to be in excess of the energy in which your hand is scooping the water.
Right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But the other thing too, when you brought up RLC, it reminded me of when I found this video about parametric oscillations, which I thought was very interesting because I do think it's analogous to the trampoline analogy. Or sorry, I just said it's kind of like a trampoline situation where like you're double bouncing somebody, but you're not paying to have the trampoline go back up to its original position. So this then allows for a situation where, if we were to think about it at the macro scale, it's almost like you perpetually double bouncing and they're just going higher and higher and higher and higher until at some point that person is just flying off.
Well, sorry to cut you off, Ashton. I just wanted to say there's an interesting paper that's recently come out pertaining to, I believe if you look it up, Jeremy, if you would like, it's called I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, amplification of electromagnetic fields by a rotating body, and it basically had to do with what's called the Zeldovich effect, Zeldovich. The paper was published in the last month or so. They took these researchers essentially took an aluminum cylinder and rotated it in between a toroidal RLC circuit, and found that the closer the resistance got to zero, the more the energy amplified in ways that they could not explain classically.
Yeah. That was basically what the video I saw was saying too, is that once your resistance fell below a certain threshold, then you had this exponential growth of current as opposed to this exponential reduction, which I didn't even know there was an effect like that. I had just believed that there must be some amplification effect based on talking to Salvatore Paez like a year ago. But, you know, more and more I find the stuff that I look into related to the stuff that he said seems to have experimental support in various papers that are out there.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of videos on parametric oscillation and resonance. I learned about a lot of this stuff after, you know, I have a video 16 years ago when I first started my channel back in the day on called Free Energy and 0 Point Energy, you know, and I talk about, you know, what happens at the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Like, oh, if you squeeze things beneath this Planck limit, they literally jump. You can either know its position or its momentum within this limit of Planck. So if you squeeze its momentum, suddenly its position jumps, and if you squeeze its position, suddenly its momentum jumps, which is a really strange, you know, thing that you learn in modern physics when you take that in college. And so I talked about that, and I actually had an idea for a crystal lattice that would be basically a bunch of diodes, all facing one direction. So all the random oscillations of waves going across the crystal lattice would only push the electrons in one direction. So you'd get a net effect of like harvesting any ambient electromagnetic energy and turning it into a voltage. And that was kind of my explanation for those rocks that Hutchison was showing off back in the day, where he had these it's basically electrets. It's trapped electric charge, I believe. That's the term I learned for it later. But so we've tried to make ways of building those. But yeah, this is interesting, and there's a lot of people that didn't want me talking to you. A lot of people that are saying, you know, I'm discrediting myself by even bringing you guys on and talking to you. But hey, you know, like we're here to get to the bottom of this stuff, and you're talking science, we're talking science, and I'm giving, you know, I have you know, a team of people behind us, you know, including, you know, Dave Chester, who are going to go out and try to verify this stuff. And we're also here ready to, you know, prove out your machine. You know, if you guys have been saying that you got some machines with free energy and stuff that you're working.
Well, I think that, and I don't want to speak for Dave, although I did officially say, you know, Dave is my partner with respect to the EtherTech thing. But man, when you look at the suppression, like what we talked about in the first 15, 30 minutes of this, you realize this isn't a joke. Like, this is real. They've been hiding this, and they've been hiding it very well. And they've probably done a lot of evil, really, really evil shit. Truthfully, you know, I do say that
scientists. I brought up a whole bunch of things that, you know, are suspicious and
discrediting people, ruining their lives, killing people, stuff like that. And to some degree, you know, my personal social media presence and what have you protects me a little bit from that, but not totally. You know, not totally. You know, if they try to get me to lose my job and what have you, because I have a normal 9 to 5, I mean, I'd be in pretty big trouble too. So, you know, I'm bold, but I'm not stupid. And at the same time, like you know, Dave and I talked to a number of people. We set up a bunch of calls about it. But you learn that even in a situation where you can have an over unity device, there's still roadblocks. Like, for example, what do you have a device now that's producing over unity, free energy device? Are you hooking it up to your grid? Are you hooking it up to your house? Or are you taking it off the grid? Now, if you're hooking it up to your house, what do you do when the electric company comes and knocks on your door and they say, hey, well, what's going on? Why are you sending back energy? Why are we paying you for energy? Where's the solar panels at? You know, like what do you do in that situation? It's not necessarily illegal, but It's not considered to be possible. They're going to think you're cheating the system. And you don't really want that to come back and haunt you. Now, the other side of it too is, well, okay, now I'm going to take it off the grid then. And if you take it off the grid, now it's a situation, well, what are you doing with the excess energy? Do you have a system where it's automatically turning itself off at a certain point so it doesn't short circuit? Do you have a bunch of batteries that you're charging? Are you, one of the things that commonly came up is, well, I'll mine Bitcoin with the rest of it, maybe set up like a server or something. But even in that situation, you have to figure out where's the equilibrium point where I'm using all the energy that I'm producing as well. So go ahead.
With engineering, it comes into like how big you're going to make your machine and how, how much energy is going to come off it. But the problem is proving this out firsthand and getting a working demonstration and actually saying, well, how can we take these, obscure physics concepts that, kind of that make sense and we know about, Casmir effect, how do we take these things and build warp drives and free energy systems out of them?
And so here's my answer for that, right?
And how do we know that we're not being misled on like some kind of psi operation, and that this isn't all just spoofing lasers from Project Bluebeam, and they're gonna spoof a whole big Project Bluebeam thing soon, and this is to make us think that it's gonna be something else.
Well, so let me respond, and then I'll ask you a question. So first thing I say is that the reason why then I shifted back towards the influencer side is that you see this, we've now got the situation where everybody just believes that free energy automatically violates laws of thermodynamics, that it means everything's free. We've got to break down these misconceptions about it. To me, it's a situation where once you explain to people where they understand it correctly, it'll become self-evident that it's possible. And then when that day comes, it's going to be like the marijuana boom and the marijuana rush, where it was illegal, legal. Now everybody's racing to legalize it, and everybody wants to get one of these licenses because whoever was there on the ground floor, now they're getting paid. Because now you don't have to worry about all these problems about people not believing you or what the electric company is going to do. You take your device, you hook it up to the grid, you treat it just like a solar panel would. Nobody's going to bother you. So it's almost like, why rush it? I'd rather just try to convince people and get people on board with it before we get to that point. And then my question for you, which is, because I know you're saying, well, I want to see the stuff work. What is the standard of proof? Like you see a lot of these devices, people have been sued for fraud or what have you for claiming to have over Unity devices. The people that the experts that the people that sue them use don't even review the devices. They just say this just violates the laws of thermodynamics without even looking at the device. So what is the standard of proof? What would it actually take?
Well, I'll give you some good examples. There's this
and
guy.
Sorry, if I could, I'm so sorry, Jared, if I could just say very quickly, and I say this not as a glass half empty type of perspective, but if my word counts for anything, there's far more money to be made when it comes to I've had, let me put it this way, I've had multiple meetings with various different individuals, part of private contracting companies, that have essentially said, when I was going to present certain things to them, they said, please dispel or remove the part of your presentation in which attempts to convince us of this, because we've seen various versions of it before in skiffs and in other places and whatnot, and there's a significant amount of money thrown at these inventors and experimenters to entice them to license out the device to these contractors. Now, what the contractors do with it after the fact, sometimes they just shelve it. Other times they actually apply it to something that we will never probably see the light of day of. But to Ashton's point, I would say, now let me preface this with saying that, don't get me wrong, there's a significant amount of fraud out there without a shadow of a doubt with regards to the over Unity stuff. Now, at the same time, if you have a situation in which all artifacts have been completely ruled out, it's not plugged into the wall, it's a relatively basic setup, people bring their own meters, they see that there's more energy being output than what's being input, they see that maybe perhaps it's even self-sustaining itself, the loop is closed, so to speak. At that point, it becomes more of a mental barrier that I've experienced, with people simply saying, I refuse to believe it, and so on and so forth. Now, with that said, there are private institutions that have been funded by highly prominent individuals, some all very wealthy, some public, some non-public, in which work on this has been going on for years and years and years, and they've been successful in a variety of different avenues and approaches. Why it's never been taken public is exactly for one of the reasons we've been discussing here. It's difficult to patent something, for example, in which by definition the patent office claims cannot be patented because it can't exist according to their belief system. So you start getting these type of issues. Now, yeah, I'll just, of course we have different forms of overunity, right? We have
That's why I've
solid,
always said, man, you don't, if you try to patent it, they'll kill you or they'll buy you out, or
or the patent will simply, there's,
Steal it.
I know of someone
the
who,
only path
yeah.
forward is open sourcing it.
I would say so. It becomes, that's where I say that I think what you guys are doing is fantastic, because you're basically breaking down that mental barrier that people have with regards to a classical understanding of science, and you guys are doing a very good job
for
of
humanity, so that we're not
Right.
trying to I'm sure there's patent sharks that probably swim around the tank too, but
right.
it's, the idea is that we're trying to come up with a solution to save humanity, because we got a couple of years left before peak oil and then power down. We're going to either have to like invent stuff that runs on way less power, which is going to be hard for us in the northern climates to heat our homes. We're going to have to go back to like chopping wood and burning it.
Well, if I could say, for example, there are a couple companies that I'm familiar with in which they're looking to take. They're not going to ever, to my knowledge, at least in the near future, announce that they have an over unity device. But what they're trying to do essentially is they're trying to approach car companies with business models by saying, look, tell the customer that you can buy the car, but you have to permanently rent the battery like a Netflix subscription, so that you can still have this come out, but there's still some money that could be made. Now, do I agree with that? Do I disagree with that? That's not really for me to say. I'm not really trying to say,
Well, it's also, what if it's lithium? What if you need lithium to do it? Or what if you need some element where, some guys knows this ahead of time, and they're going to sit on that supply line and say, look, you can't build your shit without this.
Correct.
So.
And then we also have a scenario where it's highly likely that all major energy corporations do actually have R&D departments that are aware of these devices, that have even fabricated and replicated them successfully and have scaled them up successfully. But it becomes a game of poker. Nobody wants to metaphorically pull that trigger when everyone's still making so much money off of oil. So it's kind of like, say Toyota has something, Honda has something, and no one wants to pull that trigger first, metaphorically, because it's like, we'll just wait for one of the other guys to do it, because right now it's the oil and gas stuff is still too lucrative, so to speak. Now that's where I agree with you, Jeremy, that the only way to bring this out is essentially by discussing it. And one of the things I've seen, unfortunately, in a handful of cases, and again, some individuals that have discussed this type of stuff have been frauds without a shadow of a doubt. But then there are a handful of others where they've said certain things that...
Well, it's crazy is that the frauds, get all the attention. This Andrea Rossi guy has been like...
I was going to bring up the ECAT.
I want to, if I can just say quickly, I want to clear...
years.
I'm not related. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
There's no relation.
Yeah. Good. Well, that's, hopefully there's no
This
association.
guy is suspicious because he's selling it. Someone sent me links like $25 or $250, and he claims it's a cold fusion device in the size of a small box. That's pretty incredible.
The nano fabrication that would be required to fit something of over unity production in something that small doesn't match the price range. I would add maybe 3 more zeros to the end of that price.
That was my concern too. Is it just seemed too cheap, right?
Yeah.
It was just he got called out and exposed, but the thing is, he got the most attention, and it had the effect of a chilling effect on the whole field and the community, because people who are doing legitimate research in this, like George Hathaway or some of these other guys, they're getting completely unmentioned, and now people aren't going to are just going to discredit them further through association. So it's kind of crazy how the disinfo ops or some kind of work. It's like naturally they will platform the hoaxers, and they'll platform like the people who are going to discredit it more.
That's the thing too, where it's like, I don't know for a fact it doesn't work, but I know that the amount of skilled labor required to even pull off basic over unity device is pretty high and very expensive, where it's just, you think about it, like Dave said, it's more of thinking about what would it actually take if you were really to produce it, and you just think that the price point doesn't seem to match.
But if I can say, sorry, one more thing, Andrea also said on his website that he will only ship a product to someone if he receives 1 million pre-orders worth of funding. So 250 times a million, that's $250 million. That's what business or what person says that they're going to only ship the device out after they've received down payments for 1 million pre-orders?
Well,
That doesn't.
Yeah, one other thing too, though, is that a lot of people, I find, because this goes both ways, but people name their product something different than it really is. So when someone says, "Oh, this is a cold fusion device," like, is it actually cold fusion, like with plasma, or is something else going on? I also saw this, not to hate on Malcolm Bendel, but Malcolm Bendel came up with this warp drive engine, but it's not really like a warp drive engine. And so it's like, I think that part of that can be a little bit misleading.
I will say as well, and I don't mean to criticize with respect to anyone in the field, but I personally cannot stand, with the utmost respect, I cannot stand by what Mr. Bendal claims.
Oh, hey, you know what? I got to I think Bendal reached out to me. I'm not sure if it was him or not. And then Dave Chester froze up and I think he's back. So
there we go. There we go.
Yeah,
awesome. I was hoping you didn't bail on us. We're not getting too woo and crazy for you. I'm trying to keep it fairly balanced between.
We'll bring it back to the science here in a sec, because I do want to talk about plasmas and some other interesting physics things, especially with Dave Chester. I have some. I want to know his thoughts on some stuff. But
guys, I'm so sorry. I do have to get going myself, but I just wanted to thank you guys so much for having me on and for sending the link, Jeremy. I appreciate it. Well,
Dave, it's unfortunate that your partner Sal couldn't join us, and I know that has a lot to do with his job and whatnot. That he can't. They've told him basically, if you keep going on these podcasts, like, you can't work here.
I think it's a bit of that, and it's also a bit of what's discussed and whatnot. So yeah, no, yeah. I appreciate
we're
that.
Close. We're getting close, and the fact that we've been on it for so long, trying to get this physics cracked and out there for the public, I think it's scaring them.
I agree.
So this is something I would jump into it. And Dave, thank you very much for being on here. But
thank you guys so much. Thank you.
Cat's out of the bag, man. Thank you.
You had a couple other points to that too, is that, like, if you figured this stuff out and you're like, oh, I've got to figure it out, like, man, you almost lose your incentive to try to help other people figure it out. Because the more people you teach and tell about it, like, they're actually now your competitors out there. And then there's this other view of, like, okay, you figured it out, it's real. You realize it's just a matter of time before the rest of the world figures it out, especially now. I look at
getting the rest of the physics community, because even within this own small community, there's incredible infighting. You've seen Jack Sarfati in the chat earlier, and then he was on earlier this week, and he'll probably be on again to give his perspectives. And that's why I try to play this middle ground, where I'm trying to get all different sides and really evaluate it as best as I can, with our limited scope of intelligence. I thought this was super interesting that they talked about this game that they teach it, where two people get to play the werewolf. You heard about this, and only the people who have the werewolf card know that they're the werewolves, and everyone else is a villager, and then everyone goes to sleep at the end of the turn, and then one person wakes up dead, and the villagers have to figure out. And it's usually the werewolf. It's either the villagers have to kill the two werewolves, or the werewolves have to kill all the villagers. And the werewolves always kill all the villagers almost all the time, because they have a hidden advantage, because they have hidden information. They know information that the others don't know.
People start accusing the other people. They start accusing other villagers. And actually, there's a game called Town of Salem. I used to love that game, and that's exactly what the game was. It was an online game that you played, and that was one of my favorite things too, because you really learn, like, you know, how hard it is to read people. And you feel so bad when, like, you're sure somebody's the wolf, and then you hang them, and you're like, nope, that was a villager. You're like, oh, shit.
Yeah, you never know. It's a real hard, but the hidden variables thing is a key advantage in game theory, which shows that, how the elites, because they are able to keep information hidden from the public, they're able to just think and play. They're able to play chess and 20 steps ahead of us.
Yeah, and this is where I would say, like, first of all, I want to apologize to David Chester and for you, Jeremy, for, being rude to you guys on my stream the other day, where it's like, it's so hard to, it's like, because you've got that game theory. It's like you look at it from the other person's perspective and you're like, how do you convince this other person that I'm the villager and not the werewolf? You know?
Right.
And I even have this when I talk to Jesse Michael, you know, he's like, how do I tell what the disinformation is and what isn't? You know, it's really, really hard. And the only reason why I'm confident is that, you know, truthfully, I'm just going to lay it out there. You know, I'm sure that MH370 videos are real. Like, and I even have more information than what I've revealed publicly. And then when I look at that, I go, okay, there's the answer. And now I'm just working backwards. And now I find all these guys, but they've got this scientific paper like the Eric Davises and the Hal Puthoffs out there, where other people are like, how do I know those people are telling the truth? I mean, they work with the CIA, they work with the government. How would I know if what they're telling is truth or it's limited hangout? And I just know it's true because, like, I'm like, oh, that's the answer right there. There's negative energy. These guys are talking about it. And then I just follow down that path. And that's why
I don't know, and I don't have opinion, you know, either way on that. I was skeptical in our first interview last, you know, a couple months ago, 10 months ago or so, when that they were CGI and stuff, and then the whole corridor crew with that and whatnot. I guess it's
there's a couple
what's
ways
weird
to look
about
at
it is that Jeremy Corbell hasn't touched the story. He's in every UFO story out there, and that when you try to search for the stuff, it's just completely hidden and blacklisted, which is just a weird. You know, I get really suspicious when you're trying to find it on YouTube search algorithms, and you can see that GooTube, the NSA, you know, who runs those algorithms, has hidden this information from you.
But the debunks are right there at the top, right? But all the other like 100
debunks are at the
stuff,
top,
like
and
ours isn't on there.
That's
like
super suspicious. That, you know, it's the other thing that is just weird about it. You know, I don't know. I've seen like the whole, you know, Mick West is like the video game guy, and he's like, oh, it looks like Descent. You know, that video. I used to play that video game too when you know, so like it was like the ships, and when you blow up the ship, they have that like bubble, and he's like, oh, it looks exactly the same, you know, because it's identical and stuff. And
Mick West.
You know, I can see how, you know, that has turned a lot of people off. I guess, you know, the other, you know, I can see why people are saying that, you know, have their opinions about it, whatever. But it's, again, at the end of the day, the government has crazy technology to do some crazy things. And I don't know about teleportation. I don't know. Isn't there an part of information theory that allows for no teleporting? Is it like a part of?
Well, this is actually what I wanted to jump in next. Although the no information theory, you brought that up one time, and I tried to look into it, but I couldn't quite figure it out. I think that our understanding of whether or not special relativity is really violated and causality is violated, I think we just don't have enough data to really show if the theory matches what would happen in the real world, especially when you include stuff like time dilation, which we know is true as well. It's been experimentally proven. It's like maybe the universe has this self-correcting mechanism where you can't actually violate causality, because even though you travel in your own frame of reference or from the outside frame of reference faster than the speed of light, maybe there's this correction mechanism where you just show up in the future from the perspective of the observer, which now you can't like go back in time. So with respect to time, and this brings up, I want to ask David Chester his thoughts on the double slit experiment. But my understanding of time travel isn't that you're going back to a previous state in the universe. It's just that your local bubble, if you're using negative time, negative energy, only what's inside the bubble goes to the past, which is an interesting way to think about it. Because then when you think about Stanley Meyer and why the water would break down into hydrogen and oxygen, it's almost like there's these rules or these levels, and you're just going down one level from water back down to hydrogen and oxygen. And that would be negative entropy. And then you could say, well, then really time travel then would be like maybe reverse aging, but just for like me, if I go through the negative energy zone, but everything on the outside, its entropy is still going up. So you're going to the future, but your local region is going to the past, if that makes any sense. And maybe that solves the issue of causality being broken.
Well, there's kind of two ways to look at it. Is it like a block universe where there's just time going forward and, you know, or backwards, and it's just like one thing, or is it branching off into other possibilities? So it's also possible that you could go back in time into the past, but now it's just like this new branch that's going forward that way. So some people debate on that. And then, so that block universe idea, would be against that, and that's kind of more of a relativistic idea, whereas the kind of branching into other possibilities is kind of more of a quantum idea. So we don't really know which one is right yet. So
that's my view, is like either time is deterministic and you can't change the past and you're stuck in the same loop. And even if you go back, you can't change anything in the past. Or like you said, which is maybe like many universe, many worlds type theory, where you've jumped to a new loop, right? Now you're in a different timeline type scenario. I don't know. Do
Yeah,
you
like
lean towards
sliders,
one or
right?
another?
Like that show Sliders, where they just go to another alternate multiverse or like kind of reality. So it looks similar, but things are a little bit different and stuff. And I don't know. That's kind of a weird idea, but it's again, it's like you gotta. I want to see this proved out in a laboratory that, you know, if this exists, if Lockheed really has matter wave, you know, things that can turn matter into waves and then transport, you know, we can teleport waves, we can teleport like light, you know, we've done that, but like, you know, oh man, I've been fascinated with teleportation since I was like, you know, a kid. So like Nightcrawler was my favorite X-Man, and
Oh, is he? That's fine. Mine's Magneto. So
well, there you go. And I always like try to teleport. I could fly in my dreams, and I could do the Force, you know. So I have like Magneto's power, like Star Wars powers, and flight in my dreams. But I could never teleport. I could never get myself to just teleport, and I try so hard. And the only way I could do it is to freeze time and then run from one point to the other. It's the only way I can do it.
I don't want to get stuck in a wall. That's what freaks me out. It's like you teleport. How do you know you're not getting stuck in the wall over there? That was the thing that
yeah, Philadelphia experiment, man.
Which was Project Rainbow, right? Too. Which when they were trying to cloak things, they theoretically teleported something accidentally.
Well, I think there might have. The other thing is that's interesting. You mentioned that because there's people who believe that whole thing was actually cloaking technology, and that they spread the teleportation story as disinformation. So I have the same reservations about maybe MH370 is really like this laser technology projecting these orbs, and that they disappeared the plane with invisibility technology, and that they're spreading this idea that it's teleportation, just like they did the same kind of thing they did with the Philadelphia experiment.
And for me, and I'm open to any theory that has evidence, especially when it comes to MH370 stuff, but for me, the thing that's interesting is when you read Hal Puthoff's 1989 paper on gravity as a 0-point fluctuation force, when you go to the like evaluation or discussion section, he says that this basically explains why you can shield electromagnetic waves, like with a Faraday cage, but you can't shield gravity. And it opens up the idea of like, okay, well, if we're cloaking something, we're shielding all the electromagnetic waves around it, right?
You don't need his theory to describe that. I mean, you could just study Einstein-Maxwell theory as well.
Sure. Well, I'm just saying that the point is that if you were to shield all the electromagnetic waves around a region, like with a Casmir cavity or something like that, then all you'd be left with is the gravity, because now you've blocked the barrier of all the electromagnetic waves. And I almost think that, well, if that's the case, can you create a very powerful scalar potential? And is that what a wormhole might be? Now, everything on the inside is still going to have its own region, because the electromagnetic waves that were inside that region are still trapped there, unless maybe you like polarize that whole region. But I do think, personally, this is my opinion, I think there's a connection between cloaking and teleportation. In fact, the Freescale Semiconductor engineers on board that plane, the theory that was floated like 3 days after the plane disappeared, that they started developing this conspiracy theory about it, was that those guys were developing some type of stealth technology. Now, I looked all around the internet for it, and I couldn't find anything to corroborate it. I don't know where that came from.
So cloaking is about making things not visible, which relates to light, whereas teleportation is about moving things around space. So, I mean, there is that difference. I mean, it seems that cloaking is more of an electromagnetic thing, whereas maybe teleportation is more of a, I don't know, let's say a quantum gravity thing. I don't know. But
yeah, I think there might be a connection. But
one quick thing I want to ask Dave, just to confirm and clarify, we've teleported light, but there's no experiment I'm aware of where they've teleported matter. I'm not exactly sure.
think there was one where
I
they
haven't looked into all the
buckyballs
experiments
of
about.
atoms, but I'd have to look it up. If you look at buckyballs teleportation, I think it was, I don't know if it was rubidium atoms that they did, and they super cooled them. But I think that's as close as they've come. But this brings up my next point is I want to hear really both of you guys interpretations of the double slit experiment, because to me that shows there's something fundamental about the universe that conventional physics doesn't quite understand. Now, I'll just say my opinion is I like the pilot wave theory. And I just actually heard Nassim Haramein, is that how you say his last name? He actually explained it in a way that really connected with me and resonated, because he explained in the concept of 0-point energy, which is that we are in this equilibrium of this giant field of energy, and that this is the reason why we see these non-local effects and why we see the wave function break down, because we're not in this empty space where we wouldn't be able to explain why we see this non-local kind of quantum teleportation type effect where the wave function breaks down faster than the speed of light, faster than we can like observe the change. What do you guys think?
Well, yeah, first of all, I guess it's
with Nassim lately. I mean, I met him back in 2009 at Tesla Tech, and we all went out to dinner in Colorado,
really?
down in we actually met up in I don't know if we went up in Albuquerque or Colorado Springs, but yeah, that was a long time ago. I got to check back in with him. But what were you going to say, David?
Yeah, in terms of, I mean, there's different interpretations of quantum mechanics. I mean, in terms of double slit, think about, I like Feynman's view on just looking at the path integral, first of all, as like the generalization of the double slit to like an infinite number of slits and an infinite number of screens. And then you look at space-time that way, and it's basically the same thing. So I just wanted to mention that because it's a cool little thing to think about quantum path integrals. But in terms of interpretations of quantum mechanics, I mean, to some degree, I don't think it always matters to some degree. And, you know, a lot of people might say, oh, that's not, we should try to understand the picture. But to me, I'm not sure that quantum mechanics is the final picture. So a lot of people, when they're trying to come up with these interpretations of quantum mechanics, they're trying to interpret reality. Whereas I would say, you know, there's kind of this Bayesian approach where you just say, look, at the end of the day, all of quantum mechanics is doing is saying, if you have an infinite number of identical experiments and you run those infinite number of experiments, these are just finding the different probabilities of those outcomes. And so in that sense, it might just be a theory that's just predicting what a logical deducer would kind of deduce based on the information he has. So I sometimes look at it that way. And then also, but you know, a lot of these interpretations, they tend to, it just leads to more arguments and not help science that much, except maybe the Bohmian point of view is the only interpretation I've seen where it seemed to at least inspire new physics beyond quantum mechanics, or at least attempts at it. And so for that reason, I think the Bohmian interpretation is kind of interesting just because it's focused on this idea of this particle and its wave, you know, and you could consider them as two separate concepts. And then imagine extending it, you know, usually it's the wave guiding the particle, but what if there's something else that could happen where there's back reaction? That's something also Jack Sarfati is kind of interested in. So I think there's merit in that interpretation just because it can inspire new physics. But I don't in terms of like many worlds or something like that, I don't know how to really connect that to experiment personally, but that's becoming more and more popular.
No, I think I agree with you. And it's funny because I think Jack and I probably agree on more than we disagree on, which is funny in terms of why, I don't know why he hates me so much.
Except
but yeah,
you're really Bob Lazar.
Because I'm really Bob Lazar.
Yeah, so.
But no, yeah, I think that because yeah, it is just it's almost like the universe is looking into the future and then reacting, which is kind of how I perceive the pilot wave theory, where it's like it can look a little bit of forward and back, and if it doesn't know, it automatically creates this probability where it can be at any point in time. But if it does know, then it says, nope, okay, just kidding. Now we're gonna react. And to me, the only interpretation I can come up with is that, you know, all points in space and time are connected. Is that time itself may be an illusion, and that the time itself may be either cyclical or circular in nature, nonlinear in nature, and that distance itself might be an illusion.
We got 1 minute left, Ashton, for the 2-hour mark, and I think we should wrap it up before the 2 hours, maybe.
Sure.
We've covered a lot of stuff. We didn't get into there's so much we still didn't even get into here. But where can people find you and your work, David?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, you can just Google my name, I guess. Try to find my papers, but yeah, I mean, I should work better at social media and all that. I don't really do too much, so yeah, best of luck.
Yeah, best of luck. But yeah, and you know, you can
APEC,
find
APEC.
AlienScientist,
APEC talks.
allpropulsion.com, and you can find a lot of his lectures on there. And also, he's been on the APEC conference, so you can find a lot of David Chester, more material with David on my channel on AlienScientist. More skeptical scientific inquiry. Ashton Forbes, sorry, Just Ashton on Twitter, and we already passed the 2-hour mark, so I guess it doesn't
thanks for
matter.
having me on, man. Appreciate it. Next time we can talk about, who knows, holographic principle, plasmas are another interesting, Bose-Einstein condensates, think are interesting. But yeah, thank you, David, for being here. Appreciate you, man, and thanks, Jeremy, for having me on our show again.
Yeah, this was a good. I hope everybody that got something out of this. This was an enjoyable conversation, and yeah, I'm glad we could keep it all civil and because you know,
so we
don't have to agree
Ashton?
on everything. I'm not supporting everything that Ashton's saying, and we're just giving him a sounding board to say, hey, you know, this is where the physics is at, and this is where you know, people should be at with you know, their analysis of this stuff if they're being scientific about it. So, you know, and if I'm not being scientific enough, please correct me and send me an email and let me know on Twitter, you know, what I'm missing and what I should be talking about instead. And if you're the expert, we should be getting on here instead of the people where I am talking to. So thank you all for watching.
Quick shout out. Salvatore Paya is going to be on my Hard Truths podcast November 24th. I don't do easy questions, so there's going to be some pretty serious questions for Salvatore Payas. You guys aren't going to want to miss it.
That's going to be great, man. I want to definitely participate in that. Is it going to be live?
I think we're going to do it live. Yeah.
That would be great. Oh, that would be awesome. Oh, I can't wait. Well, thanks so much for joining us, and awesome work getting, you know, a lot of the science out there to people that would never have been introduced to it otherwise, and hopefully we got some of those people you know, on the path to getting their own degrees in physics and really you know, learning this stuff, because we need more visionaries in the future of this game if we're going to actually get somewhere, humanity. Thanks for watching.
Appreciate it, everyone.
Peace.